the big developments affecting U.S. strategic forces areas have been on the budgetary front. On April 29th, the House Armed Services Committee approved legislation under reconciliation instructions that would appropriate an increase of $150 billion in defense spending over 5 years, above the department's base budget for defense.
Never before has HASC had the opportunity to use reconciliation to make a generational investment in our national security.
And on May 2nd, the Trump administration released its proposed budget for fiscal year 26, a skinny budget, which for the first time requests $1 trillion for defense, a $119 billion increase over fiscal year 2025. But there's a catch that we'll discuss later on. So where are we in the budget-making process, and what could this potential spending increase mean for U.S. nuclear forces, missile defense systems, and space capabilities? I'm Kari Bingen, Director of the Aerospace Security Project here at CSIS. Here to unpack these questions, I'm joined today by Tom Karako, Director of the Missile Defense Project, and Heather Williams, Director of the Project on Nuclear Issues. We will take audience questions, so please submit those via the event homepage. Before I turn it over to Tom and Heather, I need to briefly explain what reconciliation is. That's a word that's been used quite a bit. So in short, it is a special legislative process that allows for fast-track consideration of spending and revenue measures. Every year, the Congress is supposed to pass a budget resolution. While that resolution is not law, it provides top-level guidelines to the committees on spending caps that they must stay within, and then the normal authorization and appropriations process starts. The Senate wields a lot of power because legislation, especially controversial spending bills, can stall if they don't have the support of 60 senators to move them forward. However, a budget resolution can include special instructions, reconciliation instructions that set in motion the development of legislation on mandatory spending, revenue generation, or the debt limit. Reconciliation bills only require a simple majority to pass in the Senate, so 51 votes as opposed to 60 votes, and a majority in the House. So it can be particularly advantageous for passing controversial spending increases, budget cuts, and tax measures, which is what we're seeing here. And I would say that defense, although we're talking defense today, defense is only part of a broader reconciliation package being considered right now that would touch on everything from Homeland Security to student loans to Medicaid. So Tom, let's go ahead and start with you and the House Armed Services Committee passed reconciliation legislation. There was $150 billion in there for defense that can be allocated across the next 5 years through September 2029. So what's in there, and why does Congress, or maybe parts of Congress, believe that such an increase in the Pentagon budget is necessary? And then generally, is it what you expected, or did anything surprise you?
Yeah. Well, look, $150 billion is real money, of course. But as you said, Kari, there's some catches here. Number one is it is technically going to be passed by Congress as 2025 FY, but it's kind of being counted in 26 first and foremost. And so the skinny budget that came over kind of counted, I think, 113 billion of that 150 for 26, and that's what kind of allows them to get to the $1 trillion defense budget. But it's sort of kind of right. I'll say that the 150, as it kind of breaks down, you got $34 billion going to maritime industrial base and ships generally. That's a good thing. We need lots more ships, and our maritime industrial base has some big challenges. $21 billion for munitions, so buying more of lots of things that we're already producing. As Heather will talk about, $13 billion for nuclear modernization and $25 billion for Golden Dome. And we've got a graphic here in terms of the Golden Dome missile defense piece of it that kind of breaks this down. And these are the categories that are used there. Kind of the 18 billion that's sort of for next generation stuff, and then kind of more munitions and buying more of the same, as it were, and then especially homeland defense, which so you kind of see 18 billion and then kind of about $6 billion on the Homeland side. Now this does not total $25 billion, it totals about $29 billion. And that's if you take the things that are in the quote-unquote munitions bucket and you combine them with the quote-unquote Golden Dome, which is mostly new stuff or things that are being classified as new. That's kind of how you get to the 2029. So that's that graphic. But I think that, what's some of that going to? It's going to $2.2 billion for hypersonic defense, which is good. We are very anemic on that front. About $800 million for kind of next generation so-called homeland ICBM defense. So think GMD and next generation interceptor. A big chunk of change, $7.2 billion for space sensors, and another big chunk of change, $5.6 billion for space-based intercept work. And then a handful of other, lots of non-kinetic work, for instance. All that's impressive. But I think there's a couple questions I have. Is one, first of all, this is going to be spread out in some period over 5 years. And so when you take $25 or $29 billion and you divide it by 5, it begins to look a little smaller. And they have that long to spend some of these spend some of these dollars because of the different distinctions. And I guess the other thing is we don't know the out-year FIDEP projections. And so one can't help but notice as OMB sends over these things and it's basically dead flat, is the $7.2 billion for space sensors, for instance. When we see the out-year projections for that relative to the past, are we going to see effective cuts that kind of are offset as these numbers are offset? So we'll kind of see. We'll have to wait till we really get the full year projections, and who knows if we'll actually get the full fight up in this year. But I want to say, Kari, you flagged that some in Congress have been a little bit like, where's the beef? And I think that's right. Mike Rogers said this is a generational opportunity to go after this, but I think Senator Wicker really had it right, which is that he said this is just the 5th year of the Biden administration plan, and it's 892 from 25 requests to 892 for 2026. So I think that's about right, and I think that when you kind of add it all up, that these dollars are going to go again be peanut butter spread between the 5 years, and so it's a little bit less, I would say, than meets the eye, as opposed to treating it as an infusion in 2025 or 2026 alone. And I can't help but recall back to when the Iron Dome executive order came out in January. I made a prediction that the precedent to go back to for where this might be going was what was essentially the single biggest missile defense muscle movement of the first Trump administration. And that was the FY 2018 Missile Defense and Defeat Enhancement, which was a $4 billion procurement surge at the end of the fiscal year that was thrown in. And I think this is basically that, but spread out over 5 years as opposed to one. So that, unfortunately, is, I think, kind of the take. It's a lot more modest, I think, when you take those other things into account.
Well, and this is a good point. You're raising there's 2 different budget movements that have happened in the last week. Movement 1 is HASC passed reconciliation legislation that would provide a surge of $150 billion into the defense industrial base and targeting some of these key strategic initiatives, shipbuilding, missile defense, et cetera. But the other movement, budgetary movement, is that the president released something called a skinny budget, so just the top line spending for the entire government, including defense, and hearkened it to be the first time that we hit $1 trillion in defense spending. But you hit the nail on the head, Tom. The catch, though, is that to get to that $1 trillion, you have to take a lot of that $150 billion in reconciliation, assuming it passes, in order to get there. And so if you take reconciliation funds off the table, what's left is a fiscal year 2026 budget request out of this White House that is at the same level that President Biden submitted last year,
Before
892. But $892 billion. And to your point, if you account for inflation, it's essentially a cut. So that's a concern, I think, for many of these defense watchers. Heather, so the $150 billion, there was a sizable nuclear component to it. What was in there on the nuclear front?
Yeah, so there was $12.9 billion for nuclear, and that's between the Department of Defense and NNSA, National Nuclear Security Administration. which manages the warheads. And from what I can tell with that, it is a little bit more ambitious than the previous administration. So it's delivering on the program of record, which is the plans for nuclear modernization. And I'll say a bit more about that in a second. But it's also increasing funding for the Sea Launch Cruise Missile nuclear variant. And for me, on the nuclear side, that was the big thing that jumped out. A lot of folks, including me, have been calling for the SLCMN for quite a while. And so seeing that in there, I think was a step in the right direction. As I saw the reconciliation package, to me, that largely aligns with what we've been hearing from administration officials, that they do plan to execute nuclear modernization. They plan to follow through on the program of record and plans and those investments. Also, deterrence, I think, is becoming kind of the bumper sticker for a lot of folks in the administration, saying we have to increase deterrence, and obviously nuclear is going to be a really important part of that. I think it's also consistent with the pressure that we've been seeing consistently on the Republican side in making a lot of Trump's nominees or now appointees kind of commit and in writing, verbally, over and over and over again to follow through on the program of record. But I do just want to put the nuclear modernization investments in context, because this program of record, the modernization plan, this is from 2012. This is a nuclear modernization plan from a very different era than the world that we are living in now. Also, we have put off this modernization as long as humanly possible. And as a result, there have been a lot of cost problems. That's for a variety of reasons. But we are trying to modernize all three legs of the nuclear triad at the same time. So air, land, and sea all at once. We've already seen some cost overruns, such as with Sentinel, which we can get into as well. But also a lot of the problems that we all know exist in the defense industrial base are particularly acute in the nuclear space, I think. And so this investment, on the one hand, following through on that program of record and commitment. But like Tom, I'm a little bit concerned, is this going to address some of the serious questions that exist about the future of the nuclear arsenal and what it can deliver on? One thing from these two budgets, also I should say the president's skinny budget, all it says is it will modernize the nuclear deterrent. That's the level of detail that we got into there.
That's a pretty typical skinny budget, pretty skinny. Skinny on
obviously,
details.
I wanted a little bit more detail, but that's fine. But I think we got a little bit of a preview about what will be some of the debates when as this process moves along. As you say, this is ongoing. And the number one, obviously, is going to be cost for nuclear modernization. There were a couple attempts in the HASC reconciliation to put in language making some of this funding conditional. So, for example, Sentinel funding couldn't go through until it met certain milestones. A few members expressed concerns about Secretary Hegseth's leadership of this defense budget, which might just be traditional partisan positioning, but I think that we can anticipate those as being kind of some of the themes going forward with this. The other thing that jumped out for me, and Tom's explanation I found really helpful, the Congressional Budget Office is estimating that Golden Dome is going to cost $542 billion. There might be concerns with that, but all to say, Golden Dome is going to be expensive. Nuclear modernization is going to be expensive. And what I really want to see in the next steps is to make sure that both of those two things can happen and move forward with the investments that they need and deserve without it being at the expense of the other.
Well, and to understand more of the detail, you actually have to go to the committee print to get insights into specific lines of activities. I will say, though, as we're far from a final bill, the Senate hasn't acted. Typically both chambers will work with the White House as well. So we're still pretty early on. So I'd say, look in the bill for the details, but also recognize that's not the final. It's kind of the opening salvo. But having said that, Tom, when you started going through the details, did the funding allocations provide any more insight on Golden Dome and perhaps how the administration or Congress are conceptualizing what it looks like? Yeah,
I think we do have some insights here. I don't think the reconciliation bill would have these provisions, and they're not program element line specific. They're generic at this point. But nevertheless, I think this was likely very closely coordinated in terms of where they think they're going to go. And so there again, I think you see relatively decent mix between buying more munitions and buying more of the things that are kind of production ready on the one hand, and on the other hand, doing the quote-unquote next-gen stuff, although there's certainly some that is in the next-gen category that you might not think about as whiz-bang sort of capabilities, but it was very important. And so there may be that chunk of change for advanced ground-based radars. Maybe that's OTHRs, over-the-horizon radars for cruise missile defense. We don't know yet, but that would be a good down payment on that. Again, the space sensors, the hypersonic defense, what appears to be several $1 billion for non-kinetic capabilities. That's all again for the good. So I think you have a sense of where this is going. And Heather, I was kind of murmuring about the CBO report because I don't know how you can cost something when the architecture isn't out. And I think really and truly there's a number of assumptions. They always have to bake in assumptions, but there's a lot of assumptions there that are perhaps a little premature. I'm reminded there was some article recently that said, well, based on my calculations, Golden Dome's going to cost $2 trillion. And, well, if you put an Iron Dome on every rooftop across the continental United States, you might get there. But there's all kinds of assumptions that are being built in. I think what you're going to see is numbers that are far closer to what is actually here, and far more tractable and far more realistic as opposed to pie in the sky kind of stuff. So it's not going to cost $2 trillion because we're not going to spend $2 trillion. But nevertheless, I think you're going to get lots more space, and you're going to get some kind of space intercept capability. But we'll see, and I'll believe it when the appropriations are passed.
Well, and Congressional Budget Office also looked at the nuclear modernization program as well, and I think the number I have here is that they recently estimated that the Pentagon will spend $946 billion for nuclear modernization in the next 10 years, which is a significant increase over where they were estimating last year. So can you help explain that and maybe provide your context, just similar to what Tom just did?
Yeah, I was thinking of those. I was looking at those numbers as Tom was talking, because this recent CBO estimate, $946 billion, is a 25% increase from the 2023 numbers. So part of that might be assumptions on the part of the study. Part of that might also be assumptions on the part of the Department of Defense and the acquisition process, and things did just cost more. So a few of the cost jumps to flag: submarines. Cost of sub modernization went up by $39 billion from 2023, and ICBMs went up by $22 billion from 2023. This also ties into recent news that came out last week about Sentinel, the ICBM leg of the triad, where the Air Force said that replacing Sentinel will, quote, predominantly require new silos. And a lot of folks, I think, saw this coming, right? This got caught up in the Nunn-McCurdy process last year because it went so far over budget. I think it ended up being over 80% over budget, and DoD had to submit this study on it. But I think we should anticipate the costs for this are going to keep rising. With that said, I did want to address Tom's point earlier about generational opportunity. Because for nuclear in particular, this is a once-in-a-generation modernization. They have, intentionally, we have kicked the can down the road so far. This is the generation of decision makers that has to deal with this and has to make the necessary investments in this. And so I think the Sentinel debate is not going away. As I said, I think we just got a preview about what are going to be some of the main points for and against it. I think the administration is probably going to face a pretty hard decision about the nuclear program of record. Do you keep fighting for this program of record that was agreed to in 2012, that it commits to a certain number of each platform, and then you can tag some additional capabilities on top of it, like a SLCM, like a standoff, other things that you might want to put on there? Or do you take that program of record and say, do you know what, this was a product of its time, maybe we should revisit this and come up with something different? And you might be able to repurpose a lot of the investments already made, minimize sunk costs, but do something a little bit different, in particular because of the Sentinel news. I'm still on the fence on this one, to be honest. Up until now, I had been someone who was like, no, you have to protect the program of record. We have to get this modernization package through. And that's largely where I still stand. But I can see this administration, they like to shake things up, it seems, and can kind of see pros and cons on either side. But I don't. Well,
look, I would say we have waited. And we've kicked the can on so many things. We've kicked the can on conventional deterrence in so many ways. That pivot to the Pacific's coming any day now. That I think reaching for the nuclear deterrence is unfortunately necessary. to plus that up. So if it turns out to be 25%, whatever it is, I think doubling down on the nuclear side of the house probably makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. I do want to say that we did one of these in February. I said that the team that brought you Slickaman and Low Yield D5 was going to come through on those programs. So I think, and I guess in terms of the starting anew or something like that, I guess my question would be, what's the plan, right? And I'd be cautious that it might be politically controversial.
Exactly.
In ways that there's a reason we're still doing the program of record from 2012 is other things are more volatile.
Yeah, that's my concern is if you do consider opening up the program of record, that you put some of those investments at jeopardy and might reopen a much wider nuclear deterrence debate, which I just don't think is the debate that we should be having right now. I think debate is healthy, but I think it's time to move on with the modernization plans. But Kari, I want to flip this question back to you as well in terms of on the space side of things. Did you see anything in the reconciliation that surprised you?
Actually, not really. And if I take a step back from space, the defense priorities that the Trump administration telegraphed and have done, shipbuilding, they stood up a White House shipbuilding office, Homeland Defense, border security, facilitizing for more munitions, focus on space protection and defense. All of those things, you do see, I'll say, some pretty sizable investments on the congressional side in each of those priority areas. It's in space, what stood out to me is a good amount of money going into sensing. So whether it be space sensing to support missile defense and Golden Dome, space-based systems to do ground moving, basically track ground moving targets, air targets, the space-based interceptors that we talked about, and even some what we call space situational awareness is you can't protect what you have up there unless you know where it is and you know where the bad guy stuff is too. So greater emphasis on space situational awareness and space superiority. So those are all pretty consistent with where I thought the administration was going. I thought some of the air superiority pieces were interesting as well. So you had B-21, accelerate that for $4.5 billion. I mean, we'll see where the money shakes out, but I thought there was good signaling on B-21, NGAD, CCA, the collaborative combat aircraft. You had a good amount in there for mobility and transport aircraft, for TAC Air as well. So overall, some good investments. One of my concerns, though, is, if you have an administration that has telegraphed a flat, if not declining budget, if you account for inflation, for defense, and you have this reconciliation package that's really just a shot in the arm. It's a supplemental, an influx of dollars to stimulate the industrial base, to capacitize for more munitions. Everything that you've just talked about is a longer term plan and a longer term commitment. So how do we think about just the sustainability of all of those things that we need to do? We're investing in facilitization, but we're not then creating the demand signal that we need more munitions over the long run.
Well, that's why I think that the munitions bucket here is every bit as important as all these RDT&E stuff, because we don't know when that stuff's going to deliver. Yes, there's a lot of folks going around town making promises about when they can deliver that, but the reconciliation bill, talking everything, PRISM, LRASM, JASMs, SM6 on ESSMs, apparently based on what the line items look like those are things that I can touch, and that we'll be able to touch coming off of a line within the next 3 years. And so, look, if war is coming with China, those are the things that we're going to have available to us. And some of these other Golden Dome, some of these other next-gen things we will, some we won't. But I think that the munitions category is super, super impressive.
If I can just build on that as well, I think you're raising a really important point here, Kari, which is that we have to make the political case. Well, the administration, but also members, need to be making the political case for these investments. But I think it's not just about these investments, it's also about the speed at which we execute them. And that's where it feels like the sense of urgency behind a lot of these things seems to be missing from a lot of the political discourse. As you say, if we really want to compete with China in the short term, then we need to make those investments. No, actually, we should have made those investments yesterday. And I mean, again, I keep coming back to on the nuclear side, the speed at which we have to move to keep up with the rate of change in technology, but also the rate of change in competition. It is fast. It really is. It is a shot in the arm. It's something akin to a Manhattan Project, maybe. And so I think that that has to be part of the political signaling, the political messaging that we're trying to get as well, which is this has to all move a lot faster.
I think the bipartisan piece there is super important. I think there's not been enough of that, of making the case, and you heard that in some of the HASC hearings, actually. It's like, tell me the case. Now, there's a case. The reason we're doing this is because of the threats, because China's coming. But I'll again quote Randy Travis, which is a little less talk and a lot more action. We got to move out on this, and I don't want to hear the speeches. I don't want to see the press releases about $1 trillion budget. I want to see actual things being contracted and actual things being produced. Show me your FIDEP, and I'll tell you what your Golden Dome consists of. Show me your FIDEP, and I'll tell you what your generational opportunity consists of. But right now, I think there's also a lot of reasons to be skeptical, because behind the scenes, OMB and other places, the macro machinations are between the fiscal hawks and the national security hawks. And I think at the moment we're seeing the fiscal hawks really having a lot of cards.
That's a great point. Anything else that we're learning from the skinny budget? Any insights there? Or it's really about some of the cuts that they're taking to non-defense?
I genuinely didn't pick up on, as you say, there's a skinny budget. It's meant to be short on details, it seems like. I picked up more on the reaction to the skinny budget. I thought that was a bit more telling, and the type of reaction that it drew from Capitol Hill. That was a pretty strong signal that they were sending, which is, no, you cannot this cannot be business as usual when it comes to defense investments.
Well, my takeaway is just what I said there, that it shows that the fiscal hawks are likely have the upper hand. It was a 46-page PDF. Most of those pages were cuts. DOD was flat. And so DOD has a little bit of pain there. A lot of other people have a lot of other pain across the government. Writ large, and so that's why the larger macro skepticism for me is that broader trends. Is they're going to be trimming and trimming and trimming to the bone, to paraphrase Senator Wicker, and so that's why I worry about what the out years look like.
Mm-hmm. Right, and the reality is that skinny budget it's DOA, right? In terms of all of the other defense is flat, and so the defense hawks have come out pretty strongly against it. The non-defense cut. I look at NASA. I think took about a 25% hit to their budget to have other non-defense programs. So that'll obviously be hard for, strongly opposed by Democrats. So it'll be hard to get the numbers to pass something here. So I think we'll have to see what happens once that evolves. The other thing that I worry about in defense is, there's an effort underway to take a hard look through various reform efforts of, how do we get the Defense Department more, effective, lethal, ready, opportunities to look at where there are efficiencies. And with this $150 billion, what I don't want to see the department do is pull off and say, now, we don't have to look at ourselves. And I think that there's still opportunities here for reform, whether that's DOGE or other efforts. But, I think that there'll be we should still encourage some of these reforms and maybe some of these sacred cows that we've been unwilling to tee up in the past.
If I can quickly come back to Tom quoted Randy Travis last time, and I threw Taylor Swift back at you. This time I'm going to throw Jennifer Lopez back at you. Don't talk about it, be about it. Yeah. And I've been thinking that a lot, particularly because of how our allies in particular are watching not just what we say, but also what we invest in. And so I think that there's a really important signaling purpose behind the budget as well and what we invest in. And it's going to have to be tied to, hopefully it'll be tied to a consistent message about who is America and what is America's place in the world right now. And from my perspective as someone who tries to keep track of this, that's still a bit unclear. There's also, that's another internal debate that I think is going on, and the budget, I think we should assume, will reflect that on the executive side of the House. But all to say, there's a lot of folks outside of this town who are watching this and hoping for some signs of the direction of travel of the administration. On foreign policy, I think that is partially because there hasn't been a ton of signaling or messaging about what is the foreign policy. It's been a bit of mixed signals thus far. So that link between America's role in the world and the budget is another thing that I think we should watch closely.
So anything else that you'd want us to watch for, Tom?
Well, look, I think to Heather's point there about and your point about kind of internal changes, I think that the HEGSEF memo about Army transformation, massive changes in terms of number of command billets and general officers, massive change there, although it's unclear how long it'll take, and probably a decent amount of programmatic changes there. And I think that's actually that's a signal.
Yep.
About willing to slaughter some sacred cows and have them bleed all over the lawn or the pasture. But that's what comes to mind. I think there's probably going to be more of that.
Heather, what else are you looking for?
I mean,
should we be looking for?
Same thing that I say every time the three of us get together, which is I am still waiting for some sort of signal from the administration about what are their priorities on nuclear. I will keep calling for that executive order or some level of detail. I did, I don't think I was expecting too much detail in a skinny budget, but I was a little disappointed that it couldn't say any more than modernizing the nuclear deterrent. That can mean so many different things, right? That could mean like-for-like replacement. It could mean add-ons. It could also mean cuts and make the case, oh, well, that was a modernization. And so I'm really just looking and waiting for some sort of direction in terms of that. But yeah, as I said, the other big picture thing, Kari, I thought the context you provided about this process is a really important one. This is hardly the end of the process. It seems like we might be getting close to the end of the beginning. And so I want to keep watching, as I said, for what is the plan to balance out investments in Golden Dome missile defense while following through on these commitments to really, big budget items like nuclear modernization. How do you do that without making one happen at the expense of the other?
Well, and I think that the inject that this reconciliation bill provides for defense is really good. It's in areas that we've talked about every year: shipbuilding, munitions, integrated air and missile defense, space, nuclear modernization. So it's hitting all the right areas. Tom, to your point, it can't, though, just be about inputs. We have to see the outputs, because 2027, what is it, the Davidson date, 2027 is around the corner, and we need to be postured to continue to deter and defend if there is a crisis or conflict before us. The other thing, I think, Heather, to your point, we're still early in this reconciliation process. This defense bill, while an important step forward, it's one of several puzzle pieces that are really politically tough. I mean, there's discussion on Medicare cuts, tax cut extensions, student loan, all these other areas that are going to be really tough negotiations. So we could very well be in a position months forward here where we don't have a reconciliation package, and we do have to fall back on what is the 2026 budget request. I'd hate to see us in a CR. I'd hate to see us flatlined in defense. So, we'll have to figure that out going.
Maybe we can write the CR to include that $113 billion and carry it over into 27.
Yeah, there you go. Well, we've hit our time here. Thank you both. This has been a fun discussion and lively discussion as always. Thank you everyone here for tuning in. I want to thank our CSIS streaming and broadcasting team. Stay tuned for more joint discussions between the CSIS Missile Defense Project, Aerospace Security Project, and Project on Nuclear Issues. Good night.